Thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Um, Thanks for coming to the Iowa Microsoft Azure User Group. If you need to connect with any of us or are looking for any free resources, there are some available for you. And our topics coming up today is Xamarin Forms. July 13th, we're still TBD. If anybody on the call today would like to give a talk or have a topic that you're really wanting to give and are ready to do that, we have a slot for you there. We also would be open to finding something later for you in the year if you also have a topic. So just reach out to any one of us and we can start planning that with you. July 27th, we are going to be doing machine learning part 2. So that will be a continuation on Simon's first presentation, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Derek. It will be deploying the machine learning model to the cloud.
That's correct.
And here's our Azure resources. If you want to go learn more about Azure or anything in particular, feel free to follow that link. And with that, I will kick it off to you, Mitch.
Alrighty, well, thank you guys for having me today. And let me get my sharing set up here. Sorry, I'm not sure why things are being weird, but it's all right. Let's get this. Well, I'm just gonna go this route and hopefully you guys will be able to see here. So give me 1 second here.
No worries. Every time Teams updates on my Mac, I have all sorts of permissions issues.
Yeah, basically that's kind of like Teams and something is not playing well with each other. There we go.
Quit using a Mac. Use a real machine.
Hey, I don't. At least I'm not. That could be the rule.
I loaded Windows 11 yesterday, so I got a real machine now.
Alrighty, so now you guys should be able to see the slide deck, I hope.
Yep.
All right, so the idea behind this, pardon me one second. Let me close the door here. So I got a new office since the last time I've been talking. I got a bad echo in here. All right, so the idea behind this talk was really to take a look at Xamarin Forms, Azure DevOps, AppCenter, and basically how can we add process to the madness that is mobile app development. And the idea behind this is to really help give you all some lessons learned, some tips and tricks that I've seen from things that I've encountered while working with mobile app development to try to make life a little bit easier, to try to make the environments better for us. So with that in mind, right, who am I, what am I doing? I run Iowa Computer Gurus. We're based here in Des Moines. We do custom application development. We do a lot of mobile and .NET Core application development. So for me, the key here is efficiency and repeatability. We need the ability to go from one client project to another, have things work in a similar fashion, and be able to do things in a way that is repeatable so that we don't spend a bunch of time spinning our wheels and going back and forth. So leading right into it, I wanted to start out with the dirty truth about mobile in terms of, what are the things that people aren't saying? Well, it's frustrating. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Developing for mobile is not for the faint of heart. We have all kinds of scenarios that we have to worry about from a mobile perspective that we don't necessarily worry about in other areas of development, especially with all of the recent gains. Device-specific things, App Store submissions, those kinds of things. It's also time-consuming. Not only is it time-consuming because of the frustration level itself, but it's time-consuming because of the things that we have to do. In the case of Xamarin or Xamarin Forms, it is an amazing tool set. It allows us to use C# to generate native applications that are going to run on a Mac device, or they're going to, and that could be anything now, right? That could be anything up to and including a Mac computer, an iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, you name it. But we also then have our same code that is executing on Android devices. So because of that, it's still time consuming for us to be able to figure out the differences in nuance, be able to set up the environments, to be able to work with, oh gosh, I got to make sure that this works on Android. I've got to make sure this works here, that kind of thing. And because of all of this, right, it is environment dependent. And I'm not just talking about environment dependent upon the end device that you're testing with. One of the biggest things that we ran into as we started doing more Xamarin development was, well, it worked on my machine. My machine connected to my Mac, and my Mac worked well. Oh no, I got a new desktop and nothing worked and I lost 3 days. Or I brought another developer in from my team and now they can't get the emulators working, or they can't get signing to work appropriately. And so the thing that we found is that it was very, very hard to keep it completely developer environment agnostic with the out-of-the-box default ways that folks were talking about doing things. If you followed the guidance, you followed the documentation, wasn't necessarily doing what we needed to do. So as we look at where we're going and what I want to kind of talk through today, there are a couple prerequisites for this concept to work. So what I'm going to talk about today requires an environment configuration ability within your application. So what I'm talking about here is you need to take anything that is, oh, this is the production version of the app. It connects to this app service. It's the non-production version. It connects here, right? We need to extract, we have abstracted all of that information out to a single file. So something like appsecrets.json, which is a pattern that you'll see in the conversations that I'm going to go through today, or otherwise. So if you don't have this in your application today, it is something that you'll have to get to be able to really truly benefit from all of the scenarios that I'm going to talk through. We also need to make sure that we have all of the really ugly, dirty, nasty development setup pieces taken care of. So the certificates and key stores. So we need to have a publishing profile for Android. Or for iOS. We need to have a developer certificate for iOS. We need our key store from an Android store perspective. One of the biggest things that we're going to get through with all of this is the need to be consistent and to have that information at the ready so that you have it. Once you've done it, once you know that process, it's going to be important to be able to know that you can redo it, because as we all are aware, with the case of iOS-based items, it is a requirement that we recycle those published profiles and certificates essentially at minimum once a year. So you're going to be changing those bits of information. So we just want to make sure that we have a good process to be able to get them. And everything that I'm going to show you, including the examples that will be available for you afterwards, they do rely on the standard Xamarin project naming conventions. You can adjust them. You just have to obviously do a little bit more work on your side to adjust your build processes accordingly to be able to accommodate any differences. So what we're going to be talking through is an application that has an overall similar structure to what you would expect. This is kind of split up into two sections here just to be able to make it a little bit easier than zooming in and out in Visual Studio. So for example purposes today, I'll show you one of our commercial applications that was developed in-house. And with this, you'll see that we have the iOS project, we have an Android project, and then elsewhere inside of our solution, we have an appsettings.json file. This appsettings.json file is set as a embedded resource, as something that is going to be compiled into our actual app executable. So then it will become part of the payload in our compiled DLL. Well, the magic here is that as we go and take and build a development workflow where we're going to utilize DevOps to do building, packaging, and distribution, we can use our build pipeline to manipulate that file and change its contents prior to that app being actually compiled. So we're going to be able to do a get latest on the source code. We're going to modify that setting style or regenerate the setting style in the case of what we're doing in our examples. And then once we've done that, then we run our compile just like we would normally. And what that's going to do is allow us to change what's there. So we can, in our case, by a branch designation, configure our application to point to our test environment or our production environment, depending on what's going on. And it's having a settings file of that sort in your project that becomes the key to accomplishing that goal. What you do with it from there, how you access it inside of your actual mobile application, whether you use dependency injection or any other sort of black magic, does not really matter. The key is that we want to take all of those bits and pieces and move them to a location where we have them centralized so that we can do things quickly in a build environment to change a configuration and to be able to be set up for a production environment. So what we're trying to do here is improve that developer experience. Well, how do we improve the developer experience? What can we do with DevOps? Well, number one thing we can do, right, is to get to a consistent build process. Just being able to reliably know that you can check in source code, that source code should compile and generate an installable, executable version of your application that can be used on the devices. We also can make sure that we get to a place where we have repeatable submissions. The app stores themselves are obviously another big hurdle in this whole thing that is mobile. So making sure that we have a way to be able to get things submitted in a reliable and repeatable manner is going to be really important to making our lives easier as developers. And then lastly, we need some metrics ability, right? And if we're going to be doing all of this automation, if we're going to be working to try to make our lives easier, well, why don't we also start collecting some metrics about our application? How many people are using it? What features are they using? Are their applications being is the application crashing because of device-specific issues? All of these kinds of things are the real goal of making mobile be less of a pain in the rear end and something that you can at least accommodate and deal with within your organization. So as we continue, we need to take a look at the ways that we can use Azure DevOps as a building block structure to be able to create this better environment. So we're going to use a few things within DevOps that folks might not have had as much experience with in the past. So we're going to start out by leveraging the library secure files aspects of DevOps. So this is a location for those of you that are not familiar with what the secure files pieces are. This is a way for you as a developer to upload into your DevOps environment any sort of secure file. It's a one-way file upload. It allows you to reference them by ID so that you can upload that information and secure and use it securely within any of your pipelines that may be defined. So in our case, this is where we're going to be able to take and upload those publisher profiles, the certificates, the key stores, those values we're going to be able to upload there so that our build environment has access to it. We're then going to work with a number of different build templates because, as I mentioned before, it was my goal to not only get this working for one project, but to get this working for any number of projects that might come up in the future in a consistent manner. And so to do that, we want to look at the different parameters, jobs, and tasks that we can build to assemble a build template that would be repeatable, because there's certain things that we need to be able to do with every single one of our mobile applications. Why not make it so we have a consistent build to do so? And that's why, as I was mentioning earlier, this concept of it doesn't matter what your configuration ends up being for a particular project, but if you get all of your configuration into one file, you can take that same complexity and an application that has 2 configuration settings that needs to change by environment or 200 gets solved in the same manner in which it was done for, a more simple solution. And then lastly, we utilize the DevOps ability to publish artifacts to be able to actually get the compiled, published, signed, and ready to distribute application out into a pipeline for delivery. So what does this end up looking like? How do our secure file assets work? What kinds of things do we need to put out here? So for iOS, in our scenario, we typically support 2 different environment configurations. We support a production environment, which points to our production things, and those are always distributed through the app stores. So for iOS, it's through the Apple App Store. For Android, it's through the Google Play Store. So with iOS, this means that in our secure file assets, I need a production published profile, which is what's needed for the App Store. And then we create an ad hoc published profile. We utilize an ad hoc profile to be able to do a direct installation on our devices without having to use test flight or any other applications with this. Now, I have an asterisk next to this. And the reason why I do this is that this published profile, if you've never created an ad hoc profile before, you have to know the device IDs of every device that you want to include in that ad hoc profile. It's important to understand that because as time goes on and you need to change devices, each time you're going to need to change that profile. You need to go into that profile, edit the associated devices, save the file, and update. So there's a little bit of churn involved in that process. And then lastly, we typically have at minimum a single security certificate, which is used for the publishing with our profiles. We typically will utilize the same certificate for both ad hoc and production. Not everyone does that. I don't want to start the religious debate as to what level of complexity you want to go with your certificates. You may have more though. If you are utilizing push notifications, there's additional certificates. If you're doing in-app purchases, other things, you may have additional assets. But this is that starting point of what we need to look at and make sure that we have available. From an Android perspective, we need to have our key store file. So what we want to do is we want to plan to take all of these assets that we have, get them into DevOps so that they're there and available for us in the future as we get ready to work on our final configurations and to get our builds working. So now, what does a build look like at just the incredibly high level? And for those that haven't gone in and actually looked at a job and individual templates and parameters, we wanted to start here just so that we can kind of talk through a little bit of what is necessary to be able to accomplish a build. So this is a high level example of what's necessary for an iOS build. And what we're going to show here, and I'll show the whole template here a little bit later. But the idea is that we have a job. That job is an ad hoc iOS build. Come on, PowerPoint. There we go. The job is a ad hoc iOS build. We have a name that we can use to display it. We want it to run on the virtual machine image of a Mac OS image. So in DevOps, we can do builds right on a Mac. And then we have 2 steps to our process. The first one is a template called secrets.yaml, which we use to basically go through and configure our AppCenter parameters, which we'll talk about a little bit later, our service address, which is what web address do we go to, and then where our secrets file itself is actually located that needs to be updated. So what we've done here is I've taken the concept of manipulating that file and turned it into a templated task so that when I go and work with one project over another, I can simply provide it the inputs necessary and then it spits out that file for me automatically. Makes things a little bit more readable in the end. And then we have a template that we're going to use for the iOS build. And you'll see here there's a number of additional configuration items that it needs. Where is the info plist? What configuration do we want to build against? What is our AppCenter information, organization, and ID? Where is our provisioning profile? Where is our certificate file? What's our password for our certificate file? Any release notes if we want to include those. Do we want to publish it to AppCenter? And then where do we want to actually publish it? So the idea here again is we get declarative in it. Everything that is how do we build iOS lives in an iOS.yaml template. Everything for doing the management of the secrets information gets into a reusable pattern. This means that if I have 20 different Xamarin Forms apps that I need to do, I can utilize the same template. I'm just changing the parameters and values that are coming in. This becomes incredibly important, and I think it will become even more important as we get closer and closer to .NET MAUI, in that as Microsoft makes changes, as Xamarin makes changes, as DevOps makes changes, I can come in and edit one YAML file that is shared across all of our Xamarin projects, and then now all of a sudden, all of them are taking advantage of the updated build environments. And it's something that has helped us immensely. We do this with not only our Xamarin Forms applications, we also do this with our .NET Core in general, ASP.NET Core applications to be able to make our lives a little bit easier. Now, there is one DevOps extension that we're utilizing to actually accomplish the subtasks within. So there is a task toolkit out there. This is mobile build tasks, and we are leveraging that inside of the iOS YAML and the Android YAML to do certain things that we need to do within our application. We're working in a build environment. I want to make sure that my build environment increments my build number. I want to make sure that that build number gets all the way into and incorporated in as part of my assets and what gets built in the end. So to do that, we're utilizing the mobile app tasks free extension so that we can do the patching inside of both of the project types. So what does that look like then? This is from an Android perspective. It's going to be pretty similar. The Android build is going to be a lot like our iOS build. You can see here there's a couple things that are a little bit different. Android ad hoc build, still going to build on the Mac OS image. It's funnily enough, we see better compile performance with the Android apps being compiled on a Mac rather than compiling them on Windows. Just results in a little bit better performance. We are doing the same thing here with our secrets, and then our Android configuration is just a little bit different. Where is its manifest? What's its configuration? Its AppCenter information, and then we have the same similar style process. Where is the key store? What is the alias for the key store? What's the password for the key store? What's the specific password for the key if different? Release notes, do we want to publish to AppCenter? And then a drop location. So the idea here is we have fairly consistent, fairly clean methods to be able to do all of this, and we configure this. But we can take it a step even further by utilizing a project configuration that overall slams all of this together, which we'll show here in just a couple of minutes. But you can see here, this is our actual project configuration. So this is the YAML file that exists in the actual project itself. And so we can see here that at the top, we add a resource, which is simply our reference build configurations. So this is our DevOps repository inside of our internal project within inside of Azure DevOps. We've set up an automatic trigger for builds against develop and master. This is an older repository. We then set up our variables here, which this is how we're doing our version numbering, so that we get 1.0 and then a counter. So this, will incrementally add to that. We then rename the name of our build so that we have consistency. This just is one of the things that we do to help keep things consistent. And then from there, we have our jobs is nothing more than a template, which is Xamarin Azure Pipelines.yaml from our DevOps repository. So what this is saying is grab this template and here's my configuration. So you can see here, all that I have to do is provide it all of the configuration elements that it needs for my particular project. So ad hoc is an ad hoc configuration, release is a release configuration. My plist is here, my Android manifest is here, and we rinse and repeat. So then this is all that we end up doing on a per project basis. Everything for our central access is going to be able to be managed in that central DevOps repository. Now, where does this get us in the end? Well, at the end of the day, this gets us a really, really clean build output. So this is an example where we have our particular version number. So we can see here version 2.1.2 with our individual commit detail. We can see down here that the way our jobs are configured is this was a build that resulted in it being an ad hoc release. We can see that it was then successful, and we had a total runtime for both Android and iOS of just shy of 5 minutes. So not bad at all to be able to get all of that pulled together. And we'll be able to keep this consistency across all of our installations. And then we're doing it in a manner where we have a separate task for, a store release versus a ad hoc release. But you can do it and configure it in any way that you want. The idea here is to make sure that it's just repeatable in that process. So this gets us to a point where we can take our source code, we can build our source code. Our built source code gives us an application, right? It gives us something that we can run. But it doesn't solve the distribution. It doesn't solve getting it to the device, which is often one of the most complicated pieces. And that's where AppCenter comes into play. AppCenter gives us an easy way to deploy to users. So most of you have probably used TestFlight if you've been doing anything with Xamarin Forms or any type of mobile development really targeting iOS. It is not always the easiest to get somebody set up with TestFlight and to get them in, get them to understand what they need to do. Well, with AppCenter, you can simply browse to install.appcenter.ms. As long as you have been given permissions and you are associated with an organization, if there is a version of an application that is ready for you to install, you can go here, click install, the app downloads, it does everything. If it needs a published profile, if it needs anything installed on your device, it walks the user through the process. So it takes a lot of the hassle out of there. You can even do it with a production deployment if you needed to. AppCenter then also gives us easy submission to the stores. You have to do the initial submission yourself, but after that, you can simply click on any individual release and say release to store, and it will do the communication. In the case of the Google Play Store, if you click release from within AppCenter, it will submit it all the way through the store with final submission already being done. So if that, you didn't have any changes to make or images to update or anything like that, it is submitted for review immediately. For the Apple Store, because the Apple Store does not allow you to change things after they're submitted. So for example, you can't change an image without resubmitting your app for review. The way that AppCenter works is it does all of the bundling, uploading, and pushing to the App Store. You then still have to log into the Apple Store Connect stuff and submit the application. Now, why is that important? What's really important is for those of us that don't have a Mac in our offices, right? Or don't have as ready of access to a Mac. Since AppCenter is doing this for us and it's uploading things directly, we don't have to use any of the Mac specific tools or otherwise that are necessary to actually upload the compiled result of our application. So this means that I can do almost everything from my Windows-based device, or in a lot of cases, I can actually submit to the store from a mobile device if I wanted to through the web interface of AppCenter. And the idea here again is to free yourself from having all of this individual configuration. You still are going to need or probably want a local Mac device so that you can do emulation and testing during development. And that's going to remain a developer specific configuration. But at the end of the day, it does not matter to can I publish my app to the store if John's computer can properly run the emulator for iOS. And that's what we're trying to get away from, is that production holdup being done by somebody or by any one developer's machine or workstation configuration. Then from there, AppCenter provides us a easy set of analytics abilities that integrates into other Azure products available from Microsoft. With the analytics available in AppCenter, we have the ability to track things such as device usage, crash reports, activity reports, and get a general overall health of our application. A certain amount of data is available and just always retained in AppCenter. Beyond that, you have the ability to throw all of the data into log analytics in Azure and do far additional analysis afterwards. So what this does is it gives us a lot of benefits. And what's required for us to be able to utilize AppCenter? Well, it's really pretty simple. We do need a unique ID per application and device type. So AppCenter requires a configuration to know what app is this and what am I doing? Am I doing iOS? Am I doing Android? We have to add a little bit of one line of code to our startup to basically initialize AppCenter. And then it's a single line API for everything else. So what that results in for us is a centralized place to actually manage our releases. And you'll see here, this is a screenshot, for example, of our production release channel. You'll actually see here that version 2.1.1 was our last release. Collaborators is the internal to AppCenter. Hey, this is anybody that can look at this project. They're a collaborator. But then you can also see production. So this actually shows that version 2.1.1 was released to production. That was pushed into the App Store. You would still need to go look at the Apple App Store to make sure that it was actually released. Because just because we submit it to the Apple Store does not necessarily mean that it's out there, but it gives you that ability to come back and look. So for those of us that have been used to using releases directly within DevOps, this is where we get a little bit of just a split of responsibilities. DevOps does the build pushes the installation over to AppCenter, and then AppCenter is what's going to be able to take and push everything to production for us. And then from here, we can then start to look at some of the metrics. Again, the metrics ability, it is not rocket science here. You may very well want to utilize other analytics, other metrics tracking abilities, but we get, at least at the beginning, some really good basic information. So for example, this is some user metrics. Number of daily sessions per user, the average session duration, i.e. how long they're in the device. Funnily enough, this metric reporting is about as accurate as how long is a session on a website. So it's kind of nice to see that there's some consistency in the inconsistency. You can see the total sessions per day to get an idea of how sticky your application is for your individual users. The one thing that is really key for us, especially when it comes to looking at what's out there and why we will not deploy a mobile app to production without some sort of metrics like this, is that you get to see not only top devices. So you can see here, for example, that the iPhone 11 is the top device, the XR, then the 12. Well, that's great, and it's important to be able to know that so that we can start to look at screen sizes, configurations, and otherwise. But then look at our iOS distribution. We can see here that we actually have a large number of people that are on 14.4.2. The next largest group is on 14.6, and then we have a bunch of others. This can be a real telling, especially as you get into the Android realm, to help you understand, are people running on older devices? Are they running on newer devices, etc.? So being able to have this metric, having this data extracted for you becomes a really beneficial thing. And then you have the ability to track arbitrary events. So events are nothing more than anything that you want to track within your application. This allows us to do things so that we can start to look at, what do we want to do? The most common thing that I get as a request from our customers is, I want to know everything that they used inside of the mobile app. That is actually an amazingly easy thing to track with AppCenter. So with AppCenter, you can see here that we're looking at the login event. So the login event is something that we've seen 716 times in the last 30 days. On average, each user has done it for a little over 4 times, and the average count per session is less than 1, which means that they're actually retaining their login. I can tell a lot about the health of my application by this, just to be able to see that, okay, our stored logins are working. Our users are able to come back and see. And then what we're able to do is we can throw in any additional metadata that we want, and it will aggregate for us. So for example, the login event, we throw a successful additional piece of metadata in there. And we do success, yes or no for success or failure. One of the things that we can see here is, how often are people failing to log in? It is amazing how many times people don't know their password. This allows us to be able to kind of take a look at that. And you can see here that we're going to go through and we can do a lot of things with this. So menu click, which happens to be one of the other events here, we do the same thing, but instead of it being successful, the event that we track is menu item. And then that way we're able to see a count, a real count compared to all of the other menu items as to which item was actually viewed. So what this does is allows us to really quickly be able to go through our application and get an idea of what are our users doing and how are they going about doing it. So all of this is great, right? But I think the most important thing to do is to look at code itself and see what exactly it is that was necessary to get some of this pulled together and how we're able to do this configuration. So if we go and look at our application, you will see, just a second here. All right. So you will see with our application, again, as we were showing a little bit earlier, we have our main mobile project. We have our Android specific stuff, our iOS specific stuff. And we are using dependency injection in this project. So we'll take a quick look here at AppCenter itself. So inside of our project, we have basically everything that AppCenter can do from an analytics and tracking perspective wrapped so that we can use it easily elsewhere within our app. So we can see here that to initialize AppCenter, It's a single line call to AppCenter start, and we provided a configuration value for here is our ID for Android, here's our ID for iOS, and we want to use analytics and crashes. So this just tells AppCenter that, hey, we are going to be providing all of this type of information potentially. And then from here, we can track events. We can track events with additional options. We can track errors, and we can track errors with additional details. So for example, for errors, we like to not only track the exception itself, but what page were you on and what additional detail might we have. So this allows us to be able to take and extract a little bit of data out of our app and make it readily available. What this allows us to do is inside of our view models, we're able to use one line of code to be able to track, for example, here's an error being tracked, AppCenter Manager track error. Here's our error. It was on the create squawk page, and this is what happened. We had a failure unloading this aircraft list. Now, I mentioned before, right, that mobile app dev is sometimes a royal pain. A great example of that is the current version of Visual Studio that I'm running on. Randomly crashes and restarts with all Xamarin projects. So that is why we lost our screen sharing there. So hopefully you were able to see all of that before it was removed. And Visual Studio is restarting right now. Alrighty, so further to that point, the other piece that we were talking through was the concept of the app settings or app secrets concept. So in this case, you can see here that it's nothing too crazy. It's nothing more than what is the base address for our API? What are our AppCenter IDs? If we come and look at this and we look at the properties for that particular file, the key to the magic is that we make it an embedded resource. As long as we make this an embedded resource, we will then be able to get at it within our runtime. Doesn't matter what device, we're not worrying about where does it exist on disk, did it actually get moved into the location that we want it to get to. All of that is really a moot point, and we're able to accomplish that task nice and easy. So then we can overwrite this with our build process. So with this, let's take a quick look at the build process itself. Bear with me here. There we go. Let me get my screen sharing working here. Apparently it's not wanting to do what I want it to do. Alrighty. So as we were showing earlier, the build process itself utilizes a couple of templates and examples, and I will make this available and get a link so that we can share it out after the event. But we have basically a couple of pieces that create that whole puzzle. So we have our Azure Pipelines YAML. This is the big, ugly, crazy thing that kind of controls everything. But you can see here that it's nothing more than providing a set of parameters that we need to have so that we can be able to configure our application. This is where your homework and understanding your project. You can take this, we do this all the time. You can take an existing project, bring all of this stuff together, and if you can answer all of these questions, basically starting at line 2 and going all the way down to line 42, as long as you can answer those questions and your process matches, everything else is just going to work for you automatically. We may need to do a little bit of tweaking a little bit further, just depending on where you want to go. But the key here is, what is an ad hoc configuration? What is a release configuration? In our case, right, we actually have an ad hoc configuration in Visual Studio. We have a release configuration in Visual Studio. Not everybody does that, right? Some folks, it's release for everything. this is where your project will be adjusted. Where is the info plist for your iOS? Where is your Android manifest? Where is your secrets file? So I have it as app settings.json in the project we were just looking at. It's also app secrets and a couple of our others. It's a configuration so that you can change that on a per project basis. What branch do we use to create a store release? So in our case, our default is that the master branch is the one that's going to create a release to the store. Maybe you have your own branching strategy. This is a key for you to be able to determine what type of build do you get, what type of environment you're working to go towards. And then from here, we have our specifics for our app, like what's our dev and prod service addresses. Here's all of our AppCenter configuration, because again, what org? iOS, Android, iOS is secret and Android secret. And then what's the store version of all of that? And then all of our individual configurations. And then down here is where we have all of those individual jobs. The good news is, again, once you have this all set up and you get it configured, you don't really have to do much. And you can see here that an ad hoc iOS build is only executed when the build reason is not a pull request and the source branch is not whatever branch we say that we want to create a store package from. We can then go down to the store iOS build and we see here that it's only executed when it's not a pull request and the source branch is equal to the one that we want to create the store branch on. So this, again, we're doing this more simply. There are also other ways of doing conditional templates and conditional configuration. This was a bit more verbose, but it was easier for us to be able to manage it long term because we know this is what happens for an iOS store build. This is what happens for an Android iOS build. So a little bit more duplication with the scenario that we have here, and I'll be sure to share this template with everyone. But then from here, we can see, as I mentioned before, that these are simply leveraging individual sub-templates. So what does secrets.yaml do? Well, we can see here, the secrets.yaml does nothing more than leverage PowerShell to write out a new JSON file with all of our particular values defined in them. You can do a lot more if you want, but this allows us to be able to spit out everything that we need within reason. Then we can go and look at, well, what does the iOS build do? This is where you'll see all of those individual steps of what it takes to make an actual iOS build successful. So you'll see here, we need to install the Apple certificate. And we can see here, oh, this is where it's using that secure file and the password. Install the provisioning profile. Here's the secure file for it. Again, where those parameters are. This next piece is where we use that third-party open source extension that I was mentioning. So this says, hey, I want to go to the info plist and I want to set the new version equal to our major, minor, plus revision. This is how we then make sure that when our app is compiled, that our compiled app version matches the version that we expect it to from our build environment. We install NuGet, we do a NuGet restore, we build the iOS project, we then run the, and this is where we do a little bit of the difference between the build or release. We then do our publish to our staging directory, and then we distribute to AppCenter using the AppCenter distribute option. And this is where we simply say, hey, I want to go to AppCenter. Here's my organization and app name. This is the file. It's an Apple. And here you go. And that's only if we want to publish to AppCenter. So this allows us to then be able to publish those production and non-production ones to AppCenter. And then Android is a similar process, just the differences for Android. We increment the version number in the same manner using the Android manifest source to do our incrementing. Install NuGet, restore, build our project. After we're done, we do our assigning and aligning of the application, copy it over, publish that artifact, and then distribute that artifact out to AppCenter. And by doing this, then we get that seamless process where we're able to take our application and run from a individual submission to a final set of published items. And so at that from that perspective, then we're able to track everything back and forth. We're able to use AppCenter to then go out and look at things. And if I pull up AppCenter here, and I'll share a different screen here, one moment. Spare you guys the Azure two-factor login benefits. But basically, if you look then at what we see in AppCenter, we will have individual apps. We utilize the naming convention app operating system and then app operating system beta for our non-production. But you can see here, for example, oh, here's our iOS beta. Here's all of our releases. You can see the most recent one in this case was a while back. What's really nice is if I was on my phone, I can come in, go to this release. I can simply click download or install. I can distribute it. If I go and download this, it gives me everything that I need. So this allows me to kind of manage all of this. I can then manage my individual groups of testers, and then this is where our store connection is. We don't have it for the iOS beta, but if I come back here and we go into this and do distribute, you can see here, I have to re-authenticate, but you can see here I have the full tracking in AppCenter that version 2.1.1 was distributed on December 15th into the App Store. So credentials will change over time. You'll have to re-authenticate, but you can do everything from here. I can go back and go to Flight Files Android, which is our Android counterpart, and you'll see the same exact thing, that it was able to be deployed in the same manner. The nice thing is that all you have to do this is come in to a particular release, distribute, and you can choose store, and then it just walks you through the wizard process to be able to get it submitted to the store. And this makes it so that I spend a lot less time as a developer building and testing than I do deploying, because we put that little bit of consistency out there. And I will be working, I'll be sharing the template pack there for the build, so that everyone has access to it to be able to kind of see what we're doing. There's nothing that is crazy proprietary there, so I'll make sure that that's available for everybody, and a link to the slide deck. I know that we got started a couple minutes late, so we're getting a little bit close on time here, but I've got a few minutes yet for questions. I wanted to try to make sure to be able to get through things here. So kind of open up if anybody has questions that they want to try to get in.
Hey, Mitch, is there anything in Maui that might change your process?
Not that I've seen yet, really. I mean, the project structures are a little bit different, but at the end of the day, we still have to build an iOS package. We still have to build an Android package, and then we have to get the stupid things to the store. So most of the process, I think, will be the same. It's just that build itself might be different. Still evaluating though. I know crazy a lot of things out here too. I could have just spent the whole time talking about AppCenter or DevOps, but I wanted to kind of show the whole shebang here. If there are questions outside of this, by all means, please feel free to reach out to me directly afterwards. I am always more than willing to answer any questions that you might have.
For somebody wanting to get started in mobile development, where would you suggest they start?
Really, the best place if you're starting ground zero is get it working using the templates and examples that are available from Microsoft on how to get started with Xamarin Forms. Working up from there, it's finding things like this to be able to optimize that process. And most importantly, if you're brand new, get it working on your machine, check it into source control, and open it up on any other computer with Visual Studio and make sure it still works. Like that's the real big thing that I think catches people is they got it all working and it's on their machine and then they can't ever recreate it. So if you do that early in the process, you'll kind of catch those, oh gosh, that really should not be hard coded and tied to my machine. And that's the biggest thing that really throws people for a loop. So doing either a build local, getting it building in DevOps, one of those two things is really the key, in my opinion, to keeping things easy to manage.
Based on your experience, Mitch, or the process, it seems like this could be easily extendable to other things, like if you're using React Native or any other platform other than Xamarin. Is that true?
Yes,
Use
it's
Azure and DevOps and all that.
yeah, absolutely. We use Azure DevOps for basically everything that we do, whether it's Xamarin Forms or ASP.NET or even our old .NET Nuke stuff that we do that's web forms. We use DevOps to build everything. You can compose any build combination however you need to. And I'm a big fan of repeatable builds in any capacity.
Cool. Thank you.
Actually, I can go ahead and stop the recording in case somebody wants to ask a question off recording.